Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Khadija, nieces, nephews, nibblings, aunties, uncles, piblings. Y'all know what to do, but if you're new, feel free to take a look around, suss out the vibe, sit in my workspace and talk about whatever I want. And today's a special one because this has been months in the making. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I am doing a collaboration video with the one and only St. Andrewism, and I spilt my tea on myself. Oh, in my excitement. Today we're talking about the babies, the kids, the young folks all over the world who are truly gonna save us all because few. We're gonna dive into the rich, empowering, and necessary concept of youth liberation because, in the immortal words of Whitney Houston, I do believe the children are our future. I really do. So, y'all know what we gotta do. Let's pay some bills, make sure the crew is taken care of, and get into it. Thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. Don't act brand new. Don't act like you just got here because you know what Surfshark is about, but for those of you that don't, let me just explain. Surfshark is a VPN extension that you can add to Google Chrome that allows you to do many things, including but not limited to, and I'm gonna do this in order of my favorite, change your IP address so you can pretend you live in different countries so you can watch all the shows. I'm really on a kick with these British reality TV shows right now. I told y'all about Made in Chelsea last time. I'm still watching it. If you want to keep your internet activity to yourself, you want whoever is watching to be minding their business, Surfshark is about encryption, protecting your passwords, protecting your browsing, protecting you. Therefore protecting you. They also have a camouflage mode so people don't gotta know that you're using it, because Surfshark is about discretion. So if you're finally ready to take my advice and try Surfshark, I've been using it for, wow, like 6-7 months now, longer. I've been using it for a while and I really love it. If y'all wanna check it out, click the link in my description, enter promo code BO to get 83% off and an extra 4 months for free. Thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back into it. So, according to the World Health Organization, ageism refers to stereotypes, how we think, prejudice, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act towards others or oneself based on age. Typically, I've noticed in the media, depictions of ageism tend to lean in one direction. This sometimes silly, but still very valid concept of the fact that young folks are trashing old people, roasting them, and just trying to create as much distance from themselves, young people, and the elderly. One might observe that that form of ageism, the young against the old, is really the battle we all have against our impending deaths. That same person might also just be a little too fascinated by death. Either way, from things like OK Boomer to the weird little feud between Gen Z and millennials on TikTok.
Hey Gen Z, you can suck it. You can't tell me what to wear.
We tend to be a little disrespectful of older folks sometimes. But if I'm going to be completely honest, that disrespect has kind of been earned. And even calling it disrespect doesn't feel right because yes, some of it is just rude and funny for sure. But at the heart of this tension, this ageism against the elderly, I believe there's a real point being missed about why young folks seem so fed up, for lack of a better word, when it comes to older people. In my view, that same ageism I defined earlier is the cause, but ageism in the other direction. What I mean is that in general, we don't tend to consider how ageist we are to the youngest members of our society. We think because young people are, well, young, that they can't be responsible enough to make certain decisions. Stereotype. We then express that thought in phrases like, mama knows best, and kids should be seen, not heard, and do as I say, not as I do. Prejudice. We then use how we think and feel about how capable young folks are to have any sort of agency to limit, monitor, and essentially control young people's behaviors and lives. Now, before we really chew on that idea, because baby, there's a lot to chew on, I want to just say that throughout this video, Andrew and I are going to be challenging the way we've all been taught to think about young people. It might be weird, uncomfortable, you might have never heard some of these concepts before, and that's totally okay too. All that I ask, as always, is that you approach all of our arguments in good faith and with an open mind, because neither one of us is trying to say, leave your children to do whatever they want, let them run wild, emancipation now! We aren't saying children don't need to be guided and raised with/by adults. We're saying the how, the way we're socialized to view child rearing, the way we're taught to treat children as possessions with no independent thought, will, or understanding. That's the problem. That's the critique. That's the critique! How are our current, and if the past is prologue, our historical approaches to child rearing creating adults who cannot function without some sort of authority figure looming over them? So, to dissect all of that, we first have to name some things, mainly how our society is ruled by the elderly, or in other words, how we live in a gerontocracy. This gerontocracy isn't just about governing bodies being mostly comprised of the elderly. It's about how children in our society are ruled over and controlled on the day-to-day, everyday abuse, like home life. As you grow up, you're taught to obey your parents. They brought you into this world and they can take you out. You're taught that you have no agency or opinion that matters. At least not until you're 18. If you don't follow the rules, you're then punished, and this punishment can come in a lot of forms. Some of our parents and even school teachers back in the day and in some parts of the world today really believed in spanking that ass to teach you a lesson in obedience. And just think about that for a moment. As a child, if you don't do what you're told, if you break the rules or ask too many questions, you're literally beaten into submission. We'll talk about the effects of all of this on adulthood in a bit, but needless to say, kids have a natural rebellion and resistance to authoritative parenting, as Ashanti Alston notes. All of us actually do. And I want to pause for a moment and talk about something called the Milgram experiment. I know a lot of people have heard of it. It's that experiment where you have somebody in one room and another person in another, and they're supposed to be administering shocks to that person. And they were trying to see how high people would go. It's the whole thing about authority, because after World War II, the Nuremberg trials, all of that sort of stuff, people just being like, it wasn't me, I wasn't the one murdering people, I was just, there, and I was following orders. So it was kind of like that whole thing of, such a sad explanation of the Milgram experiment. But the thing that a lot of people forget or don't even know is that they've done different iterations of that experiment, and the more that somebody in the room, like you'd have a teacher or somebody telling you what to do that was dressed up as a scientist, the more that that person told the experimentee, you have to shock the other person, the more that person was like, I don't have to do shit. No. Because we actually don't really like being told what to do, actually. But anyway, sorry, that was just a side tangent. Either way, if we know that this authoritative style of being and, of course, parenting isn't the tea, why are we so hell-bent on continuing this tradition? Because of familiarity. So many of us were raised with parents who only knew this style of parenting because their parents only knew it, and so on and so on.
Daddy-O was one of the greatest blessings of my life, and also one of my greatest sources of pain. There were two issues. First, he had a brutal temper. And second, his drinking.
If you only know beating your children as a way to get them to follow the rules, you're more likely to continue that traumatic cycle of violence because, after all, it worked for you. You turned out all right, right?
We are indoctrinated from an early age to accept the suppression of our agency and reduction of our personhood. It starts in our own houses, but extends into broader society, where the child is seen as subhuman, a commodity to be puppeted, an animal to be domesticated, a product to be assembled and molded, an object to be programmed, mere property. The spontaneous, curious, and vibrant being, the natural explorer, learner, observer, and mover, is crushed by the psychological suffocation process of modern childhood. Our society isn't interested in nurturing, maturing, and empowering our potential. It is more concerned with developing us in relation to authority, in relation to the hierarchies of class, gender, race, etc. Ageism is deeply intertwined with the school system, the structure of organized religion, the legacy of colonialism and slavery, and the systems of queer oppression.
So big thank you to Andrew for introducing me to the work of Ashanti Alston, because he was an integral part in my portion of the script, particularly his paper, Childhood and the Psychological Dimension of Revolution. PDF will be linked below. In this paper, Alston talks about the psychological mask that develops as a result of all of this trauma. Many of us reluctantly place this mask on as a method of protection, but it becomes so necessary we often forget that we're even wearing it. But once it's fastened on your face, on your soul, it functions just like your heart pumps blood, lungs air, or stomach digests food. You forget about or repress the memories of the traumatic experiences which created the mask, and go on through life not even realizing that it governs, influences, pulls, and jerks your every physical, emotional, and intellectual activity. It effectively cuts you off from being in direct touch with your true feelings, with your spontaneous contact with the outside world, with your friends, with your energy, and with your curiosity about life in general. I often make jokes about how I don't remember most of my childhood because my brain is protecting me, but it actually kind of makes me sad to think that I had to block so much out because I just needed to survive. And how many other people have had to do the same? How many of our parents had to do the same? As Alston points out, our natural rebellion and zest for life wither away under this constant authoritative erosion evoked in the name of religion, as Andrew will dissect in a bit, and the quote, American way. Though I feel like you could insert any country's name in that slot, to be honest. Eventually, this authoritative erosion becomes the breeding ground for our distorted humanity. It is here, though, and in this way of words and behavior, that the sexism, racism, capitalism, the religious, intellectual, and moral belief systems, as well as the lying, dishonesty, irresponsibility, emotional denial, liberalism, manipulation, egotism, slavishness, etc., are taught and passed on. Now, what is being passed down as a general term is our socialization. Alston explains that the objective of socialization is to civilize the child and keep everyone bound to the traps of tradition and belief. Another name for this could be domestication. And this is something Don Miguel Ruiz talks about in his book, The Four Agreements. Children are domesticated the same way we domesticate a dog, a cat, or any other animal. In order to teach a dog, we punish the dog and give it rewards. We train our children, whom we love so much, the same way that we domesticate an animal, with a system of punishment and reward. Ruiz explains that eventually the domestication is so strong that we don't need our parents to do it for us anymore. We do it ourselves. And there's the rub. I think I'm using that's correctly, right? Anyway. Through this constant domestication, this reward and punishment for the right or wrong behaviors, we teach our children to be obedient subjects. Subjects who must conform to survive in society as they conform to survive in childhood. As adults then, many of us end up lacking the necessary skills, the true skill set it requires to dismantle these systems of oppression we abhor so much. Skills like curiosity, critical thinking, and skepticism, and the playful spirit to mess around and make mistakes. When the adults in our lives demand we stick to the status quo and practice blind obedience, it just makes it even easier for the obedience to translate into things like nationalism and maintaining the same systems of oppression that prevent real change from happening. We become adults who don't question the authority all around us because we've been conditioned from birth to accept it as a part of life. Deviating from the script again, when Andrew and I were first doing this and talking about this concept, I think I thought I knew what youth liberation was. And when I sent him the first draft of the script, Andrew, so respectful, he was like, I don't really think this is Khadija, I don't know. Because I was out here talking about living in a gerontocracy, but talking about how, yeah, we need to get more politicians that are our age. So if there are more politicians that are our age, society will change. But it's deeper than that, because we have some politicians in office that are around our age, and there's this idea of like the median age, I think, in Canada is around 40 or so, and the median age of a politician is like 49 or so. So the differences in average age of the population versus that isn't necessarily super different, even though, anyway. But in the States, that difference is much larger. where like the average age is in the 30s and the average age of a politician is in the 60s. So there is an element of truth to that of, I think, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land said this, he was just like, some people just gotta die because that's part of it, yes. But I also think it is so easy to lose that imagination that Ashanti is talking about that has been stripped from so many of us, to think we don't need to have politicians that are the same age as us around there. We just need to create something completely different. Like, these politics systems, all of this stuff is stuff that was created before we got here, and it's not working for us anymore. So let's make something new, you know? It takes a lot of vision and imagination, and again, that playful curiosity, that skepticism. And I pride myself on having that a lot of times, but there are a lot of times that I don't have it just because of the way I was domesticated in this world. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm unlearning. So yeah, the first draft of the script, my section was a bit like, Khadija, this is not youth liberation. This is like still, you know, master's tools type shit. So obviously, thank you to Andrew for like correcting that, and we sorted it out clearly. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in there because I thought it was funny and thought it could be useful as like a real-time example of how all of us have a lot of unpacking to do and unlearning to do and stripping away of this psychological mask. Maybe like putting butter underneath it every time we learn something new or something that helps domesticate us less. It's like we're putting butter underneath the mask to slowly be able to lift it off our faces because we can't just rip it off. I'm the king of a weird metaphor. Anyway, and just to give you specific stats, because I said it before, the US average age is 38.1, but over half of the Senate comprises of members over the age of 65. So that's like 26 plus years older than you trying to make decisions.
Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Ephesians 6, 2-3. Enshrined in the Abrahamic religions is the commandment to obey and respect the authority of parents, so that one may live a long life on earth and enjoy everlasting peace in heaven. But laws, and especially laws which purport to be divine, have consequences. The consequences of religion-based ageism, especially but not exclusively in fundamentalist environments, are painfully clear. Yet youth liberation would be considered tantamount to rebellion against God itself. Children in fundamentalist religious contexts learn quite early to repress independent thinking, self-inflict shame, foster fear, and rely on the external authority of scripture and religious leaders, regardless of personal perspective. The consequences of rebellion are even more severe than in non-religious contexts because of the promise of post-mortem punishment for unbelievers, which enraptures children in fear for their very lives. That trauma often persists long after one has left the fold, and some never muster the courage they need to escape, even after they've reached adulthood. Small children are left completely at the mercy of religious adults, with no say in the matter, and as they age, questions are shut down in a powerful social context that renders rejection of those teachings utterly impossible. You cannot trust your own mind when it contradicts the established dogma and when external authority is the only permissible guide. And as a result, children grow up losing touch with inner instincts so necessary for decision-making and moral development. Children are made to fear the world outside of their religious subculture, particularly in evangelical sects, as a fallen battleground for spiritual warfare between God and the minions of darkness. Some children have also faced the violent and abusive practice of exorcisms for their perceived demon possession. Children are also made to feel evil and inadequate by the doctrine of original sin, which leads them to develop habits of psychological self-flagellation for their failure in the eyes of the above. They can never be good enough because to consider yourself good or wise or strong or capable on your own is considered pride, the worst of all the sins. And of course, this abusive environment empowers physical, sexual, and emotional harm in families and churches that goes unchallenged in a context of sexual repression, patriarchal sanctification, and queer condemnation. Now I want to talk about the impact of ageism and the intersection between systemic racism and ageism on Black children in particular. In a society that views children as property, as animals to be domesticated, it's no surprise that Black children receive the worst treatment in order to crush us into submission to the system. That process of subjugation takes place at home and at school and by society at large. Take for example, licks, also known as whooping or swats or spanking or cut tail. Unfortunately, it seems as though those who overcome and evolve beyond the irrational acceptance of adults hitting children are the exception to the rule. The belief in this particularly harmful practice seems so deeply ingrained in many that it's not uncommon to see jokes about one's plans to hit their future kids on social media. It's a common refrain among spankings evangelists that they turned out fine, but the scientific literature has made it abundantly clear for the past 50 plus decades that the practice is extremely detrimental. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Virtually every professional organization in the US and Canada concerned with the care and treatment of children has taken a public stance against the practice. 128 countries ban it in schools, and 58 countries ban it at home as well. There has never been a peer-reviewed study that has been able to establish the efficacy of cut tail as a means of long-term behavior modification, as an effective form of teaching, as an effective punishment, or as an effective means of instilling self-discipline. Nor have there been any published research findings in peer-reviewed journals that serve to refute the previous research. In fact, because of our research, we know that licks has been associated with a detrimental impact on the parent-child relationship, a risk for undesirable emotional consequences, including long-term trauma, a risk for the onset of dependence on external controls, and a proclivity towards authority-directed behavior. And for those who choose to ignore or dismiss such research, you may have brain damage. Literally. CAT scan pictures in children who had been subject to spankings as a punitive measure found an abnormal lack of brain development within the portion of the brain responsible for emotional functioning, predisposing them to mental health disorders like anxiety and depression, and prompting violent or aggressive behavior. Acts of physical aggression towards children can disrupt or prevent the optimal conditions necessary to facilitate a normal process of healthy brain development. So chew on all that for a bit, but while you do, keep in mind that we actually don't need any research to end the practice of spanking. Licks is not practiced in every culture in the world, but beyond that, just as we stop tolerating husbands beating their wives, we can do the same for parents beating their children. Why shouldn't they have the same protections against being struck? Black children face one extra justification for the practice of corporal punishment: the police. As the argument goes, if I don't discipline them now, out of love, the police definitely won't. But regardless of how Black children behave, whether they riot, walk home from the store, listen to music with friends, play in the park, or just make eye contact with the police, they still risk being killed and blamed for their own deaths. Black youths are not viewed as innocent or worthy of protection. When Toya Graham was celebrated for the video depicting her cussing out and beating her 16-year-old son in the middle of a riot in Baltimore, justifying it with fears of her son becoming the next Freddie Gray, it merely affirmed the belief that Black youths are inherently out of control and in constant need of discipline to beat the angry thug out of them. It's a belief that lets white supremacy off the hook and frames Black children's behavior as the enemy. There's a shared belief that the best way to protect Black children from a racist society is to beat them. Not embrace them, not hear them out, not see their pain. These beatings, which occurred with similar justification on the plantation and during Jim Crow, come from a place of desperation and terror, not logic. But these beatings only add more pain to children in need of parental love and protection in a world hostile to their existence. Beatings are not empowering or affirming. they only perpetuate trauma, bringing the pain outside, at home, and increasing the risk of the behaviors beatings purport to prevent. Speaking of society, and particularly American society's treatment of Black children, studies by UCLA professor Philip Goff found that college students and police officers, when asked to estimate the ages of children who they were told had committed crimes, were far more likely to overestimate the ages of Black children compared with non-Black ones. A study by researchers at UC Riverside found that teachers observing preschoolers engaging in pretend play were more likely to evaluate Black children more negatively than non-Black ones. Imaginative and expressive Black children were perceived as less ready for school, as less accepted by their peers, and as greater sources of conflict and tension. Black kids who forget to return a library book are seen as thieves. White kids who do the same are seen as forgetful. Black preschoolers are disproportionately suspended, and Black students as a whole have higher rates of suspensions, detentions, and expulsions than their peers. They are disproportionately given more severe punishments for the same offenses than their white peers. Society perceives Black children as older and less innocent, a trend referred to as adultification, which Khadija has spoken about before. Through the lens of ageism, Black children are seen as property, but they are seen as less valuable and less worthy property and are thus fast-tracked to the margins. This is something that Black children are able to notice from an early age, and if people actually listen to them as conscious, fully fledged humans, they would know this. For all the conferences and workshops to analyze causes and solutions to the preschool to prison pipeline, the focus has been on student behavior and policy transformation. But I think that's the wrong approach. These solutions view reform or behavior change as the silver bullet for the students being pushed out of the system. However, this framework doesn't account for the reality that public education is, in part, structured in response to Black students who are viewed as a threat to the status quo. The criminalization of Black youth is not only intentional, but in response to Black resistance in the face of oppressive systems. When strategies to address the school-to-prison pipeline focus on changing behavior, they concede that Black kids should face consequences for their reaction to oppressive systems, but that those consequences shouldn't push them out of school. It's completely twisted. We need to challenge the anti-Blackness foundational to the formation and enactment of school discipline. We also need to challenge the carceral structure of schools themselves. When the wave of Black migration swept into Los Angeles between the 1940s and 1970s, Black communal organizations conceptualized and used public education as a space to develop alternative models of cultural expression and organizing. The response by city officials, planners, and private capital was brute force and policy tactics to undermine Black liberation. Current modes of school discipline were developed in that context to suppress dangerous assertions of Black culture, autonomy, and education. Black youths already have a heightened awareness of their oppression. They did then, and they do now. We should be fighting with them, and not within the confines of their oppressors. So, the violence and trauma found in the intersection of ageism and religious coercion, and the intersection of ageism and racism, was a lot. But now here's Khadija on the intersection of ageism and cis heteronormativity.
Let's just talk about gay shit. When it comes to queer issues, ageism plays one of the biggest factors in how queer youth first come to their realizations about their queer identities, and second, the relationship they develop with that identity. We are all indoctrinated into cis-het heteronormativity from the earliest ages: birth certificates, boy and girl colors, toys, separate bathrooms, separate sex ed classes, myths about how boys are versus how girls are. Yeah. And quickly, I need y'all to understand that people are not arguing about the existence of sex. They're arguing about the existence of gender. There's a difference. there's a difference. This type of straight indoctrination, and yes, it is indoctrination because a lot of folks assume their kids will blindly accept being straight as their orientation without questioning it, leaves many queer kids either not finding out they're queer until much later in life, compet, hey girl, or leaves people growing up forcing themselves to be something that they're not. Because we live by adult rules, we don't even get to choose how we interact with gender expression and performance. Which means that when some brave kid comes out as not straight, they're sometimes met with disbelief. How could you possibly know that? You're too young. But I'm not too young to pretend to be married to my best guy friend. I'm not too young for my aunts and uncles to be asking me about boyfriends.
Just checking.
Not only are you not believed if you come out as queer before a certain age, you're also seen as not being allowed to make your own decision when it comes to how you choose to express your gender or your gender identity. And I think we all know where I'm going with that. But before I start, Andrew and I are not advocating or condoning the idea of performing surgical practices on children, on minors. Like, no, aka gender confirmation surgery for trans kids. But I do believe that young folks who identify as trans or are experiencing gender dysphoria, those kids should be allowed to explore their relationship to gender, to see what fits for them and what doesn't, and then decide, in my opinion, in their 20s, how they want to continue to express themselves or reaffirm their gender identity. But in a world of elderly supremacy, LOL, but it's true, those decisions seem far too much for a preteen or a teenager to have any say in. At least that's more the norm, slowly changing every day. As Andrew mentioned in an earlier section, children who grow up with fundamentalist religious beliefs thrusted on them aren't given the freedom to think for themselves, which makes it a lot easier to teach your children certain values. When those values start to involve guilt and shame to stomp out any hint of your child's potential latent homosexuality or wanting to express themselves in a different gender or anything, we all know what that does. If you're taught from inception by all the adults in the room that being queer is wrong, that playing around with your gender or feeling uncomfortable in your assigned gender isn't a normal or real phenomenon, you're gonna have a pretty complicated relationship to your queer identity, I think. Sometimes this turns into going to the complete extreme. Once you have the freedom to explore on your own, that can be fun, but dangerous if you're not careful, like anything. Sometimes it turns into a battle your entire life of who you want to be or who you feel the most yourself as versus the shame you feel for even entertaining such an aspect of your identity. And sometimes it turns into such unchecked self-hatred and rage that a person either finds themselves as the loudest anti of the community they actually belong to, subsequently using any opportunity to denigrate leg booties, LGBTQIA2 spirit folks, and even worse themselves. Either way, bad consequences all around. So, if these are all the possible consequences of ageism against the youth, gerontocracy, all of it, how can we move forward with all this knowledge? How can the adults in the room, the older folks, meet the younger folks in the middle? So Andrew is going to outline some really fantastic points for those of you wanting to parent a child within the framework of youth liberation. So I won't say too much except this. As aunties, uncles, and piblings, it's our job to take time to listen, to see those younger than us, not as our lessers because their age, but as individuals capable of being active participants in their lives and in our lives. As the younger adults, it's our job to bridge that gap between those younger than us and those older folks, to be a sort of point of contact and translation for younger folks working to make real change in the world. And this is something that I really believe in. This is something that we are striving for with the nonprofit that I work with, Marigold Music Program, always gotta shout them out, because we really want young folks to feel like they have agency and power. And it's specific to music making, but it translates to everything. I really do believe that you can learn so much from anyone, especially younger folks. And I have talked a lot about, listening to people that are older than me, that know more than me, all that stuff. I still value that 100%. And I really value what young people have to say. Most of the people that I work with are I think all of them are under the age of 25. And I've learned so much from them. And I think that that requires a certain sense of like humbling your brow, so to speak, because we're always taught that the younger you are, the less you know. And yes, there might be less experience that you might have because you haven't lived as long, but at the same time, I don't know, that argument doesn't really have too many stool legs to stand on, in my opinion. For the youths, the nieces, nephews, and nibblings, I encourage y'all to continue to cultivate your curiosity, to continue to ask why and challenge rules that adults have placed in front of you. Please do so with a semblance of self-awareness and compassion, though, as not all rules created by adults are meant to stifle, but to protect. We just don't always get it right sometimes, plus our parents are teaching us what they learned, so empathy is key, as well as rebellion. As the younger generation coming up, you unfortunately have inherited a pretty chaotic and problematic world, but you also have the power to change that, way more than adults might tell you that you do. So go with that power, lean into that agency, and consider those coming up behind you as you act. My final note, back to the grown folks, is it's fully our job to teach the kids, but then let them go on their own way. Let them do their thing and trust that we've done a good enough job guiding them so far.
So, how do you parent a child within the framework of youth liberation? Well, alongside the village, individual caretakers should keep this in mind. 1. Explain yourself. Every opportunity is a teaching opportunity because children are eager to learn. The question isn't disrespect, it's an effort to understand. By explaining your reasoning, you give the child the tools they need to build their own moral, social, and personal framework for living life. Not to mention, by explaining, you get to reflect on your own thought process. Sometimes you find that you have no good reason for a rule. In those cases, try not to take yourself too seriously and recognize that being open to your own fallibility helps both you and your child develop a more critical mind. 2. Ask them questions. I think people underestimate the creativity, complexity, and intelligence of children's minds because they don't ask them enough questions. Get to know your child as an individual and show them that you're listening and that you care what they think. 3. Give them space. Let them fall so they can learn to walk. Let them experiment and fail because that is how they learn. That don't mean let them walk into the highway, but don't confuse your inconvenience when they make mistakes for actual danger. 4. Prevention is better than the cure. You can avoid a lot of conflict by removing sources of conflict before it can arise. Keep valuables and dangerous items out of reach. Give your child avenues for creative destruction, and give your child options that allow them the ability to own their own decisions. Children don't get much say in their circumstances, but by giving them opportunities to, for example, pick veggies from the grocery store or pick an outfit to go to the park, allows them a measure of much needed autonomy. 5. Ask for help. If you don't give your child opportunities to do things for themselves, or to help you do the things you need to do, you infantilize them and lull them into a state of dependency. A state of dependency which has a negative impact on their adolescence. Psychologist Robert Epstein found that the turmoil we find in teens today come not from brain underdevelopment, but from infantilization by the family, the school, the media, and the state. Free yourself. Ask for help. Ask for help with things that are just at or above their developmental level, challenging them to develop a greater degree of maturity and autonomy. 6. Remember that punishment, deprivation, praise, criticism, distraction, and a lot of the other things that people recommend to parents are merely efforts to train Pavlovian reflexes of retribution, praise-seeking, or easy distraction. Parenting is not about controlling and domesticating little beasts, and children aren't parasites of your patience and silence. They are inexperienced little people who you can partner with and guide as they develop their understanding of the world. You'll both make mistakes on this journey, but remember you are partners, not enemies.
I want to say thank you so much to Andrew for just collaborating with me and helping me get a more fleshed out understanding of this concept. It just, I don't know, just there's so many radical and different ways that we can approach activism that aren't just about protest or mutual aid and things like that. I think this is one of those ways of if you feel like you don't know what to do, the way you're raising your children is one of the stronger ways too, because as they become adults, what kind of adults are they going to be? What kind of adults do you want them to be? You know, what kind of adult do you wish you were sooner? Maybe you are that adult now, but you wish you were sooner. I don't know. It's a very rich concept, and I think it is so fascinating, and we'll put stuff in the description so y'all can read up on it and check out. Definitely read Ashanti's paper. That was like, yes. And yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed this. And I believe the children are future. Give them strength and let them lead the way. No one will know the words. Give them a sense of pride. Okay, the battery's about to die. Feed your pets, water your plants. Remember, you can always change your mind. Bye! Me panicking. Andrew, sorry, I'm gonna stop trying to, just youth. Okay, now it's going too fast. Why can't I get the perfect speed on this shit? Ooh. Whoop, why am I reading this so weird? Khadija, do you know the punctuation exists for a reason? Khadija? Yeah. Anyway, let's get to the gay shit. Sorry, my laptop's gonna die. Hold on. Jesus Murphy. I just want to finish recording this. I just want to finish fucking recording this. That's all I want in this world is to finish this goddamn. Just die. Just die. I believe the children are future. Give them strength and let them lead the way.